I'm a 32-year-old man, yet it is broad daylight as I write this post because I'm about to share what haunts me to this day, to the point that merely thinking about it, or in this case typing the memory, is enough to send chills down my body and make me feel like a terrified child. I've only told this story to a handful of people over the past 10 years because of how terrifying an experience it was for me, but I feel like it can be therapeutic to get it off my chest and share it with others. Maybe others have had a similar experience. To tell this story and give it justice, I have to tell you of an experience that happened 3 years before the encounter that this is about. My name is Joshua, but I changed the names to protect the privacy of the others involved in the story. I live in Arkansas, and in late 2003, near the middle of fall, right before it started getting really cold, my wife and I were invited to camp with a friend of mine and his girlfriend at Sugarloaf Lake in Oklahoma. I say camp, but the actual plan was to meet at Sugarloaf, and my friend, who I'll call Bob for the story, wanted to take me and my wife around to see some paranormal places in the area. We got there around 7 p.m. I was driving a white Ford 1996 F-150. Bob was driving a 1980 something white Celebrity. It was really a piece of crap vehicle. Anywho, it was late dusk, becoming dark, and we all climbed into Bob's car, and he took us around the area. First, to an old abandoned house, but other than some raccoons rustling around, it was 2 hours of wasted time. Then he took us to a graveyard that was supposed to be haunted. Again, a bust. Then an old church that was run down and also supposed to be haunted. Once again, it was a yawn fest. At this point, it was getting really close to midnight, and me and my wife were getting pretty bored, and I spoke up to Bob saying, "Man, this really hasn't been that freaky of a night." That's when Bob smiled, saying he was saving the best for last. He handed me a Polaroid picture of a hillside covered in trees and daylight. I asked him, "What was that?" And he asked me if I saw a house or any type of light pole or anything in the picture, to which I replied, "No." He took the picture back and said that because there isn't, and there are no power lines either. About this time, he turned down an old dirt road and passed a small house. After that, it was 2 miles of dirt road with woods on one side and a barbed wire fence on the other. 2 acres of field connected to a wooded hillside. Nothing to light the night except the full moon above our heads and the clear, starry sky. After what seemed like forever, he stopped the car and told us all to get out. We did as he asked. He walked us to the side of the car where the fence, field, and wooded hillside was. He looked at his cell phone, which his phone and mine had no signal. This was 2003, and the area had no cell towers, but he looked at his phone and said it was 11:57 and told us all to watch the middle of the hillside. Even at complete dark, I could tell this was the same field and hillside from the picture. 2 minutes go by and nothing had changed, and then exactly at midnight, a small light flickered on in the middle of the hillside. A chill ran down my back as my wife, Bob, and his girlfriend all watched this small light. To me, it looked like an old kerosene lantern began to move, swaying back and forth. We sat and watched in complete silence for what seemed like several minutes, until I finally spoke up and asked what the story was with this. Bob replied he didn't know, but the locals had told him that at midnight, every night, this lantern lit up and swayed back and forth through the woods until the sun came up, and then it disappeared. Nobody knew what the story was. At the time, I was a 19-year-old guy who didn't think anything could scare me or hurt me. So since there were no houses around, I yelled, "We see you! Wow, you're so scary with your little lantern." Bob shushed me, but it was too late. My wife screamed and pointed. I was laughing, but my laughing stopped as I looked to the hillside to see the lantern swaying back and forth, but moving down the hillside to the field at an unhuman pace. It was gliding, and it began to speed across the field towards our car. We didn't stick around to see what it was, because within seconds we were in the car and flying down the dirt road back to the lake. We looked back to see the lantern moving slowly back up the hillside to where it first appeared. The ride back was silent until Bob spoke up, saying, "Crap, I forgot to put gas in earlier, and the only store around is closed. And if we decided to go back out anywhere, it'd be best to take my truck until he could get gas in the morning, as he only had about half a quarter tank left." I said okay, and a few moments later we arrived back at Sugarloaf Lake. We'd parked by the lake docks, and we dropped my tailgate and sat and talked about what had happened. Bob's girlfriend was pregnant at the time and told him she was hungry. He told her we'd brought back some snacks, but said she needed actual food. Since the local store was closed, he asked if we could take my truck to the next town over to get some food. His car wouldn't have enough gas to get us to that town, so I obliged. We shut our cooler, put the tailgate up, and loaded into my truck. I turned the key, and nothing happened. My truck was dead. Deader than dead. No ding, no lights, no clicking noise, nothing. For all intents and purposes, you would think the alternator was out. This was strange. After the night we had, it made us all uneasy. We got out of the truck and popped the hood, pulled Bob's car around to the front, and attempted to jump my truck with his car. This is where it gets even weirder. As soon as we connected the jumper cables to my battery and his girlfriend started the car, and within a second the cables in between the connectors started to smoke, and in a flash of fire they burned up within seconds. The cables were nothing more than bits of melted rubber and ash, with only the end clamps still on our batteries. Bob ran and turned off his car, and we took the clamps off of our batteries. We looked at each other in the eerie moon and starlit night. Did I mention there were no light poles around? And we both got a bad feeling at the same exact time, as we suddenly realized we'd been hearing a distant noise in the lake, and it was getting louder. It was a boat motor. Now, like I said, it was that time of the year it started getting really cold, especially at night. We were bundled up as it was, and we were standing still on land at night, but somebody was out on a boat. After midnight, the sound of the motor was going pretty fast, but we saw nothing. That is, until the boat was about 50 yards away, and a very bright spotlight came on, temporarily blinding us all. Bob and I told the woman to get in the car and lock the doors. I reached into the bed of my truck and gave Bob my tire tool, and I picked up another. We were standing in front of the vehicles in the middle, the hoods up on both of our cars as the boat pulled up to the dock, and two heavily bearded men in their 30s to 40s stepped out of the boat and walked up. It's hard to give an accurate description as their spotlight was still pointed at us, and it covered the men in an eerie shadow while blinding us. They looked at us in our vehicles and glanced at the direction of the car where the women were sitting and let out a small chuckle.
"You fellers got some sort of car trouble?"
One asked as he lit up a cigarette. Yeah, nothing we can't handle though," I spoke. The guy with the cigarette sniffed the air and looked down between Bob and I's feet and saw the smoking ashes of what was the jumper cable.
"Looks like it was more than your jumper cables could handle. You need some help? We got tools on the boat, so I think I can fix your problems right up."
Then the other man who had chuckled in the beginning said, fix them right up." I was speechless at this moment, with my mouth hanging open. The two men walked back to their boat, and we heard what sounded like chains rattling around as we tried to make out what they're doing. The spotlight was so blinding, we could barely see, but the chain noise was enough. Bob looked at me, and without saying a word, we both jumped in the car and drove the hell out of there. For the next few hours, we drove to a populated area of houses. The woman fell asleep, and Bob and I were talking about how weird this whole ordeal was, and what a scary night it actually ended up being. We woke the woman up and we drove back to the hillside. We got there with about 4 minutes left until sunrise, just to see the lantern still swaying in the woods. Bob looked at me and smiled and did the motion for zipping my lip, and we all watched in wonder as right at the sunrise started, the lantern slowly faded away to nothing. After this, we got in the car and drove back to the lake, feeling safer now. When we got there was no sign of the boat, and the hood of my truck was still up with the doors locked. On a whim, I told Bob I was going to start trying the truck one more time before he drove us somewhere where I could get cell signal. And I'll be damned, the truck started right up with no hesitation. We all went our separate ways, happy to have seen the sunrise and counting our blessings and swearing to leave paranormal investigating the area to others. We never wanted to come back to this area and run into those boat people again. However, all things fade with time, even fear and common sense. 3 years later, Bob, who I haven't seen in almost 2 years at this point, called me up and said he had a proposition for me. He wanted to get back into the paranormal again, and so did I.